Good morning. It is Sunday and it is the 24th of May. I'm going to do something a little bit different with today's vlog. So every day since the beginning of lockdown here in the UK, I've been recording sort of day in the life daily vlogs. And a couple of weeks back, one of those vlogs, I did a drawstring bag tutorial. And I promised I would do another one, but for a zip bag. And that's what I'm going to do today. So the last time I did a tutorial, it was in the middle of the week. It was a homeschooling day, a working day, and I wanted to do it on a day like that to just demonstrate how easy it is to throw together a bag and not worry about it too much, not take it too seriously, even with everything going on in your life. So this time it's a Sunday, so it should, in theory, be a little bit easier, although the best laid plans and all that. So I'm going to show you what you need to make a zippered bag. We're going to make two today, and I'm going to show you how to do it. Just a little disclaimer though, I'm in no way a sewer. Everything I do is completely made up and self-taught, or from watching tutorials on YouTube or just looking stuff up, and I've just developed my own sort of very relaxed and not very accurate way of sewing over the years. So you will end up with a bag that you can use and show off, and people will say, oh my goodness, I love your bag, and you can say, oh thank you, I made it. But it might be a bit wonky in places, but no one's going to notice. Have fun with it. You can do this. If I can do it, anybody can. Zips are my evil nemesis. So if I can sew a zippered bag, you definitely can. And I'm going to show you how I do it. So if you follow along, you'll end up with one. It might be a bit dodgy, but it will be a bag. So let's go and get started. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to need to make our zipper bag. The first thing we're going to need is fabric. We're going to need a main fabric, your pretty fabric. We're going to need a bottom fabric, and I've got a choice here of a pair of my old jeans. These are from the early 2000s. They are boot cut, thank you very much. And a pair of my husband's old trousers. Now I've washed both of these and I'm going to give them an iron and just cut them up so that I've got the fabric ready. I can see what I've got and what I can work with. And then I will pair them up and decide which fabric I like with what. I'll go through the measurements with you when I cut them out. You're going to need a ruler. It doesn't have to be a fancy one like this. A set square, a normal ruler, anything will do, anything that can get you measuring. You're going to need some lining fabric. I've got some old shirts here that I'm going to cut up, old school shirts. You could use interfacing. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to use interfacing in this project. It can give the bag a nice sturdy feel at the end. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I just can't be bothered. I will say right at the top of this video, as I've said before, nothing you see here is professional or expert. I do not know what I'm doing. I'm entirely self-taught, and most of the methods I show you will not be the proper ways to do things. It's a very relaxed way of sewing. You're going to need some zips. Now, the bag we're making is going to be 11 inches wide. And I don't have a lot of zips in my zip stash. This is about all I've got. All of these zips are 13 inches, so they're too long, but they're plastic. The zips themselves are plastic, so we can cut these to size. You could use one that was too small, but then it would give you an opening that wasn't really in keeping with the size of the bag. So it's probably better to use one that's too big, or the right size, obviously, but I don't have the right size, and cut it to shape. We're going to put some little tabs on the end as well, which I'll show you as we go along. I can't decide yet what colour I'm going to use, so I'm going to wait until I've paired up my fabrics and then have a look and see which zip I feel will work the best. You're going to need a pair of scissors, a pair of sewing scissors, good sharp pair, but you know, a pinch, I guess kitchen scissors would do the job. A sewing machine. I mean, it's entirely possible to sew it by hand, but I'm going to use a sewing machine. You are going to need some embellishments. Well, you don't need these are optional extras. I've got some ribbon here and some buttons and some extra bits of fabric. It's just little things to make the bag look finished, I guess. I quite often will look out my embellishments, put them to one side, and then completely forget to put them on the bag and not realise until it's all finished. So let's see if these actually get added. You will need an iron. That's very important. As you can see here, my fabric has been folded for a long time. It's going to need a really good press before I cut it and during the sewing process as well. Keeps everything nice and crisp and generally makes things a bit easier. And that's it. We're going to do zip bags today. My last tutorial was for a drawstring bag, which is this one. I'm really happy with this bag, and if you want to go and have a look at the tutorial, the link is underneath and on the screen now. But today we're going to make zippered bags, just for something different. We're going to use the same measurements that we used for this bag. So for the main fabric, your pretty fabric, we're going to need 2 bits cut at 11 inches by 6.5 inches. And for your bottom fabric, your contrast fabric, you're going to need 2 pieces cut at 11 inches by 5 inches. And then for your lining and your interfacing, if you're using it, you're going to want 2 pieces cut at 11 inches square. So those are your measurements. I'll put them on the screen and they're underneath this video as well. And I will show you how I cut them out as I go. We're also going to make another pouch, not using those measurements. So this is some fabric I cut out previously. I had some denim fabric for some very favourite jeans, and I had literally just enough left that I thought I could use to make a bag. So I cut exactly what I could out of the fabric I had remaining. And this actually measures, I think, 11.2 by 4.1 or something really random like that. And that meant I could eke out every last bit of the fabric. So all that matters is that my contrast fabric is going to be the same width. The height, I can make whatever I like. It doesn't, you know, I'll probably make it double the height of the contrast fabric, this bottom fabric. But I just wanted to do this at the same time to show you that even if you've got a tiny bit of fabric that you don't know what to do with, you can just wing something. You just throw something together. You don't need to have exact measurements all the time, but you can still do it. You can still throw it together. I'm going to show you how I do it. So we're going to make one to some planned measurements and one in a kind of winging it style as well. Let's see how this goes, shall we? Let's get cutting out the fabric. I've cut all of the bits out so far just using my ruler, but for the lining I have a template cut out just on a bit of paper, sellotaped together. So this is 11 by 11, and I'm going to use this to cut out the lining and any interfacing that I'm going to use, just because it's a bit easier and I can probably cut out a couple at a time. Okay, here's all the pieces that we've got cut out. So first of all, I'm going to make a decision about fabric for my first bag. This is the one that I've done according to measurements I usually use. So I've got 2 options for the bottom of the bag. I've got the denim from my old jeans and the fabric from Dan's old trousers. But I think I'm going to go for the brown, because that's what I originally thought of doing. I just want to show you as well that my edges that I've cut out here, nothing I have cut is accurate or precise, and that's okay. We're still going to get a decent bag, I absolutely promise you. So this is the fabric I'm going to use for my first bag, and I shall keep this one that I've already cut out, and I'll make another bag. So I'll just pop that to one side. I've cut out my lining, my 11 by 11 inch lining. This is an old school shirt and it came out really well, so I'm really glad to be able to use that. So that's all done. And then over here, this is the pieces of denim that I'd already cut out. So I've done the same width, which was 11.2, and I just did 5 inches for the height. So it's 11.2 wide, the bottom pieces are 4.2 deep, and the top pieces are 5 inches deep, and we'll see how that works out. This is definitely going to have some interfacing, and I've also got to cut some lining. But what I'm going to do, because this is not a these are not measurements I usually use, I'm going to sew my panel pieces for the bag together first, and then I'm going to use that as a template. If you can hear creaking, that's my eldest daughter walking about in the kitchen. She's just getting herself a drink. It's a very hot day. If you can hear other noises, it's probably a fan in the background. Where was I? Yeah, so I'm going to sew this together and get my bag panels, and then use that as a template, which I will cut directly around for the lining and the interfacing. And I'll show you how I do that. So now it is time to go and sew these bits and pieces together, and then we will move on to doing any little embellishments and the zips. Right, let's get these sewn together and then come back. I showed this on the last tutorial I did as well. I don't actually have a craft room, and this is where my sewing machine lives, next to the dining room table, next to the ukulele, next to the plug for the fan, and it just sits there, and when I need it, it comes out, and when it's done with, it has to go straight away because I don't have any specific area for crafting. So I'm going to sew the main pieces together for the panel of my bag. I'm going to use these clips to help me along. These are a great alternative to pins, especially if you are prone to sticking pins in your own fingers by mistake. They're really inexpensive. You can get them on eBay, and they're just a really good way to hold your fabrics together whilst you're working. So I'm just going to make sure that I've got my right side facing up. I need to do a bit of a better job of ironing here. And then I'm going to choose which side of this trouser fabric I want to have as the right side. It's a slightly different colour on the inside of the fabric, but sometimes that's preferable to the outside. I think I'm going to go for the inside of the fabric. It's a slightly darker and more uniform colour. So I'm just going to make sure I've got that for both pieces. So that's the right side. Now I'm going to put my two fabrics right side together like that, and I'm going to clip them along this edge. Right, I'm ready to sew these together. I'm going to use 1/4 inch seam. Now you could really use whatever seam allowance you want. Some people prefer it slightly narrower, some people prefer it slightly wider, so they've got a bit more wriggle room. I would say in the case of sewing a bag such as this one, it doesn't really matter as long as you use the same seam allowance throughout. So I'm going to do 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I've got my two pieces sewn together. So I'm going to open them out, and I'm going to give them a really good iron to make sure they sit nice and flat. Now, on the back, I'll just show you the difference it makes. You can choose to iron it so one of the pieces lies completely flat and the other one will be bent over. So I'm going to show you the difference it makes, because it does make a slight difference. I'm going to iron this one with the bottom thicker fabric lying completely flat, and the top fabric, the yellow, is the one that's going to have the little fold there along where I'm ironing. I'll show you close up to show you what I'm on about. So you can see there that the yellow is slightly folded. The other one, just as a demonstration, I'm going to iron so that the fold is in the bottom fabric and the top piece lies flat. So now the bottom part of the bag is folded slightly and the top piece lies flat. And that gives a very slightly different finish. Here's the one where the bottom fabric is folded on the back, and here's the one where the top fabric is folded on the back. Now personally, I prefer the one where the top fabric is folded on the back, which is this one, the one nearest to us. But really it's a matter of preference, it's whatever you prefer. Whichever one you decide, make sure you press it nicely on the back and flip it over and press it nicely on the front. I've just noticed there's a kind of mark on this fabric here. I'm not sure if that's from the iron or if that's actually in the fabric, but it's too late to worry about now. I might put an embellishment like a button on top of it to hide it. So I've got your fabric nice and flat and pressed like this. Now's a good time to think about any embellishments that you might want to put on. I think this is definitely a stain on the fabric, so I want to put some embellishments on here to cover it up. I've got some buttons and I think I'm just going to use those. I've just got some yellow buttons that would look nice. I've also got the brown buttons that I cut out from these trousers. That might be quite fun to add because obviously it came originally from the trousers. Basically all I want to do is cover up this mark on the fabric. So I think I'm just going to choose 2 buttons that are going to do that, and I'm going to sew them there, so it's going to look like just a fun little embellishment. I probably would have done it a bit more placed had I not had a mark to cover, so I might have put them at a jaunty angle there or up here or so on, but because I've got this mark I want to disguise, I'm going to place them where they're needed. And I'm going to sew those on now while I can easily pick up the fabric and just hand sew them. Now I'm going to save myself a big job here, and instead of going over this with just normal sewing thread over and over, I'm going to get some embroidery thread and I'm just going to tie it. There's my buttons all tied on. I just literally tied them in 2 or 3 knots at the back, much quicker than having to hand sew them. Now I'm going to cut some interfacing. I've decided I am going to do some interfacing for this bag. I don't have a lot though. Let's just see. I'm going to have to use 2 different types. I think there's slightly different types of weight. This is just a normal sew-in Veline interfacing, and this is another one which I can't remember where I got, so I'm just going to use 2 different types. What the hell? So all I'm going to do is put my panel that I've cut out on top of my interfacing, like this. And I'm going to cut around it. Now interfacing is quite grippy, so I'm not even going to weight anything down because the fabric that I've placed on top is not really going to move around. It should stay put. I'll say once more that this is not the official proper way to do it. It's probably going to make things a little bit harder for myself when I come to sewing it all together, but it does the job and it means I can get it done nice and quick and feel satisfied that I've got a nice project that I have completed at the end of the day. Okay, so now I have got my interfacing cut out, my main pieces are cut out, ironed, sewn together, and I've also got my lining cut out. It's time to add the zip. So first I'm going to choose what colour zip I want, now that I know what fabrics I've got. Beige is a bit boring, let's not do that. Pink I quite like, I think that's quite a fun one. I also like the dark purple, but no, I think it's going to be between light purple and pink. I'm going to go with the light purple. Okay, now we have to prepare the zip. So first of all, we know that our bag is 11 inches wide and we want our zip to fill as much of that gap as possible, but not completely because we want a little bit of space at either end. And we're going to make, you could just sew the zip in as it is, but we're going to make little tabs for the end to make it look pretty. So we're going to start off at this end where the little metal bit is. Okay, I'm just going to trim it slightly. So the way I do this is I do wing it slightly until I get the measurements that I want. So I've just trimmed the end off there, just above the metal bit. Okay. Now I'm going to take a piece of my main fabric and I'm going to create a little tab for the zip. And I'm just going to do this by eye, because I want to be able to fold over a tab like this, so I'm completely enclosing the raw edge of the zip, but I also want to enclose in the raw edges of my tab, so I want to give myself room to do that. So we can adjust this as we go along. Okay, so I've got my scrappy bit of fabric there, which I am going to, at either end, I'm going to fold in a little bit and iron it, and then fold it in again to encase the raw edge. I'm going to do that at each end. Just a tiny bit folded over. There we go. And now I've done that, I'm going to bring those two folded edges to meet so that I'm folding it in half. And I'm going to iron it again. So if you want to know the measurements that I've just used there, that piece of fabric, when I unfold it, is 2¼ inches. And I've folded in twice about, let's have a look in millimetres, about 5 millimetres, and then 5 millimetres again, and then folded it in half so that my finished little tab that I've made measures about just over 2 centimetres, just in case that's helpful. And then I'm going to put my zip, I'm going to zoom in to show you, I'm going to put my zip end right up against that fold, and then it's encased, and I'm going to clip this like that. Okay, so in a minute we're going to sew that line and I'll show you how we do that. Now, I know that when I sew this bag together, I'm going to want a seam allowance here. So I want this tab to sit just on the other side of that seam allowance, which will be about here. So there's a little bit of a gap here. And I know I'm going to want the same at the other end. So I am going to get a pen, and I'm going to mark where I want the end of the zip to be, which is going to be the same as at this end, which is about 1 centimetre in. And I wouldn't normally measure this, I would just eyeball it, but just to give you an idea. It's going to be about 1 centimetre in there. That's going to be the end of my zip. So I'm going to unzip it, oops, down to here, to make sure I've got the zip on the side I'm going to be using and I'm not cutting it off. And then I'm just going to snip that end off like that. Be confident, don't worry. And now I'm going to make another tab in the same way. I'll probably just eyeball it again, to be honest. Okay, I've done the tab. I have made it a little bit smaller than the one on the other side. That's fine, it doesn't matter. I started off with a bit that was too big and I just cut it down to size because I want to leave myself with a good opening in the zip. Now it's a bit trickier to get this tab on. Just zoom in a bit there so you can see, because obviously these ends are flapping about. So all I do is just hold them together like that, make sure the zip's out the way. Fold it over, making sure that the end of my zip is right in that fold. Keep hold of it, and I'm going to put my clip right on the end to pinch it together like that. And I'm going to put another one on one side for good measure so that it doesn't shift too much when I start sewing. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew along these edges. Now, the important thing to remember here is that your sewing machine needle is not going to like bits of metal. It will break them. And remember, on this side of the zip, there is a little bit of metal right at the end. So just be aware of where your little bit of metal is and make sure that's nowhere near where you're sewing. In my case, the metal's right in the fold and we're going to be sewing right on the edge here, so it's not going to be a problem. Okay, we've sewn our tabs to the end. So as you can see, I've used a very narrow seam there. And you can see it on both sides. Okay, now we are going to put the zip onto the bag. So I'm going to get some clips ready. And I've got this is an outer piece of fabric and it has got its interface directly behind it. Okay, make sure that's all nice and lined up and ready to go. And we're going to take our zip, make sure it's slightly open. We're going to put the zip right side down on the right side of the bag. So it's right sides together. I'm just going to trim the ends off the tabs. Forgot to do that because it'll make it easier for pinning this all together. Okay, so right sides together. So the pin is right side facing down and the bag is right side facing up. Make sure that's pretty much in the middle so you've got the same gap either side. And clip it together with those top edges level. Now make sure this zip is open, I don't know, about 1/3 to 1/4 of the way down. That'll become apparent why when we start sewing. Now we're going to take a piece of the lining, and obviously I'm using a white lining, which is so it hasn't got a right side. But if you were doing this with a piece of lining that did have an obvious right side, you would be putting that right side facing down. So you would have the wrong side of the fabric facing up towards you. And I'm going to line this up with the top as well. And I'm going to use the same clips, just taking them off and putting them back on again to clip it all on. Okay, so I've made a zip sandwich. So here is the interfacing. Here is the outside of my bag right side up. Here is the zip right side down. And here is the lining, right side down. We are now going to go and use our zipper foot to sew along here. So I've got my zipper foot all set up. I have the option of having the needle on this side or this side, on the left or right. I've got mine on left of the zipper foot as I'm looking at it. And I'm going to line up the edge with the edge of the fabric. That's how I'm going to guide it along. And I've got the interfacing on the top just because my sewing machine's a bit happier when it doesn't have to feed interfacing through the bottom. And I'm going to sew all the way down until I'm almost reach where the zip is. If you remember, we undid the zip, and I'll be able to feel further down here where that lump is, where the zip is, which is about here. And when I get to there, I'm going to stop and then I'll show you what I do. Okay, we've reached the lump where the zip is, and I've made sure that my needle is in the fabric. And I'm going to lift up the zipper foot and I'm going to go into my sandwich together fabric. I'm going to pull the zip backwards past where I've already sewn. It's a bit fiddly, but you can do it. Just be careful not to bend your needle, don't tug it too hard. Okay, so I've now pulled that zip and it's now right back here behind where I've already sewed, and I can now freely sew all the way to the end without the zip getting in my way. Okay, so we've sewn it. Let's have a look at how it looks. So if we turn it and pull out the lining from the top, here we have our zip sandwiched in between with the top side of the lining here, the top side of the bag here, and there we go, that's how it looks. Now I need to now sew the fabric to the other side, so I'll show you how we do it. So I'm going to give this a really good iron now, just to make sure everything's sitting flat, which will make it a bit easier for the next stage when we attach the fabric to the other side of the zip. Obviously, if you are using a plastic zip, be careful because sometimes they can melt with the heat. These ones seem to be okay, but yeah, do be careful because plastic does melt. Okay, so now that's all nicely pressed, so it will stay out the way. I can add the fabric to the other side of the zip. So again, I'm going to open up the zip to about 1/3 to 1/4 of the way down. And then I'm going to take my other outer piece of my bag and put it, this time you've got the zip facing right side up, and I'm going to put the bag, outer bag fabric, right side down. And again, I'm going to line it up with the top. I'm going to use the sides of the previous panel as a guide to where it should go. Make sure that we've got about the same on each side. And then I'm going to take my interfacing and put that on as well and line that up with the top. This is where my dodgy cutting starts to come back to haunt me. And I'm going to pin the zip, the outer bag fabric and the interfacing together along the top edge. There we go, so that's all pinned on there, and we also need to do the lining. So we're going to flip it round. So we've now got the wrong side of the zip facing up. And then we're going to put the right side of the lining facing down. I really should have used a fabric that had an obvious right and wrong side to show you. But if you imagine that this top side facing up is the wrong side of the lining, and the side that we're putting against the zip is the right side of the lining. We're going to line it up at the top there, and again just remove the clips and stick them back on. So again, we're creating that zip sandwich. Right, we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to sew along this edge in exactly the same way. I'm going to put it this way and sew down with the zipper foot in exactly the same position, remembering to stop just before the bump of the zip, put your needle into the fabric, lift up the zipper foot, move the zip lump backwards, put your zipper foot back down and continue to the end. Okay, that's done. Let's open it up and have a look at what it looks like. Oops. So this is the lining side, and as you can see we've got the wrong side of the zip against the right side of the fabric, and then on the right side of the bag we have the right side of the zip. So now this needs a really good iron. Now if yours at this stage, like mine, is a little bit wonky, you can see here it is a bit wonky, that doesn't matter, no one's going to notice. The key thing is that the fabric is not too close to that zipper, otherwise it might get caught, especially on the lining side. You can see it does come a little dangerously close in places, but I think what I'm going to do to minimise that happening is I'm going to top stitch it. So now I know that I've ironed it really well and that it will sit really nice and flat, I'm going to run a very small line of top stitching just along this edge here at the top, and I'm going to just make sure that my fabric on the underside as I do that is in exactly the right place, and I'm just going to use a running stitch and I'm going to keep the zipper foot on to do that, so that I can get my my needle exactly where I want it, quite near to here, and hopefully that'll just keep the fabric from budging. And I'm just going to use my normal white sewing thread that's already in the machine because I've got to stop filming and make lunch, and that's all I've got time for. Okay, and that really is the most complicated bit of the whole process. You've done the hard bit, the rest of it is just finishing it off really. My top stitching, in case you were wondering, is very wonky. It's not going to be winning any top stitching prizes. So the next thing we need to do is, if you're putting on any handles, you need to get those ready. In true Blue Peter style, here's one I made earlier. Now, I showed how to make little handles like this in the last tutorial I did, so I won't show you this time, but if you want to see, just go back and have a look at my simple drawstring bag tutorial, and I showed how I made this very simple, easy, scrappy handle, which I'm just going to pop on. So you're going to need your pins or your clips, and what we're going to do is put the right sides together, pin it, and then sew around the edges. We're also going to create a box bottom. So the first thing you need to do is lift up on one side the main fabric of the outer part of your bag and the interfacing, and the same on the other side, and lift it up like that, and you'll have the lining come together on that side and lay it down. And we're now going to pin it together. So I'm going to start with matching up my seams here. I want the seams on the outside here, these ones, to match up. If everything else is wonky, but these two seams are matching up, people are less likely to notice, because if these are perfectly matching, people are going to think your sewing is amazing. So I'm going to clip that first on each side there. Now the next thing I want to make sure I clip is up here where the zip is. I want the tab that we made, I want that kind of bent towards the lining. It won't make much of a difference in the final sewing up, but I'm going to bend that towards the lining and then match up the seams here so that the top of the lining and the top of the outside of the bag are matched up together, and pin that. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to make sure I bend that tab down towards the lining, and then make sure my top of the bag and the top of the lining are more or less lined up, and clip that. Okay, now I'm going to make sure the bottom of the outer part of the bag is all lined up like that. I'm going to clip that, and I'm going to make sure that the bottom of the lining is all lined up. You can see my dodgy cutting now. Okay, it's all clipped together. So now I'm going to sew around the entire thing. So I'm going to start down here. Right, let's use a pen to mark it, because it will help me remember as well. I'm going to start my sewing here. I'm going to sew along here, up the side of the lining, all the way up, over the join here, trying to avoid the tab that we made so that that doesn't get caught in our seam allowance, all the way up to the top here, along the bottom of the outer edge of the bag, back down here, back down the other side of the lining, along here, and then I'm going to sew to about here. So there's a gap of about, I don't know, 3 inches. That's going to be the gap in the lining that's going to allow us to turn the bag out. Now the other thing to remember is that your zip that is now encased in here, you need to make sure that's open. Do not sew it up at this stage with it closed, which I think I've just done. So I'm going to just go in and make sure that zip is open before I sew it all together. And of course, don't forget, if you can hear that noise in the background, it's the washing machine. Don't forget, if you're using any embellishments like handles, this is the time to pop it in. I forgot. So I'm just going to unclip this, and I'm going to put it on the inside of my bag. I think I want it positioned fairly high up, about here, and then clip it in. Okay, lunch has been served, shopping has been done and put away, and we're back to this. I have sewed around the edge as I described, and we're now going to turn it out. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to cut the box corners. What am I talking about? So it's all sewed together, and I'm just going to use a set square. I did the same in my last drawstring bag tutorial to do this. And all I'm going to do is measure, but I'm actually going to measure from the line of sewing, this time. In my previous tutorial I did the boxing before I sewed and just measured it from the edge. I'm not sure what difference it makes, but that's how I'm going to do it this time. So I'm going to do 1.5 inches. So I'm going to measure, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches along the bottom, and this is from the sewn edge, from the line of stitches, not from the edge of the fabric. And again, from the line of stitches up, I'm going to make a mark at 1.5 inches. And I'm just going to put my set square, one line on that mark, one line on that mark, and draw around it. It is not the most accurate way of doing it, but it's quick and it's easy, and I can do it in between doing everything else that I need to do today. Gonna open it up like that, and I'm going to make the bottom seam meet the side seam like that. Bring them together, flatten them out so that the outside edges all meet like that, and clip it in the middle. And then I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I boxed the corners, so here we go. I've just sewn a line along here with the same seam allowance that I've used for everything else, which was 1/4 inch, and I've done that on the bottoms of the outside and of the lining. And now we're going to turn it out and see if I've managed to catch all the seams. I very rarely manage to sew a bag and not leave at least one part of the seam uncaught and then have to turn it back out and go over it, but that's fine. We're going to check it before we sew up the lining. Look, I'm going to have to turn it back out and go and sew over that. Right, I've gone back in and hopefully caught those raw edges. I told you I very rarely managed to get it right the first time. So let's turn it out and keep our fingers crossed. Okay, this is now looking good. We've managed to pretty much match up those seams on the bottom with the box bottom. It's all matched up, which is good. We've managed to match it up on those side seams, so if anything else is wonky, people are going to mainly be seeing this. So that's what's going to make it look neater. We've got our embellishment covering the stain on the front, and the handle is here. And I really like how the purple zip looks. So now we're going to press this to within 1 inch of its life to get it looking really, really good. You will see as well, here at the side, where we did the little tabs and then tried not to catch them, you've got a little bit here that kind of just sticks up, which I really like how that looks. But if you caught the edge of it in the seam allowance, that would just be enclosed, which would look really good as well. I just happen to quite like it with the little gap. I think it just looks really neat and finished. Right, I'm going to give this a good press, but first I'll show you the other bag. So as I've been making that particular pouch, I've also been sewing the other bag. I've sewn it together in exactly the same way, but I've done a couple of things slightly differently. So I'm going to turn it out and I will show you. Okay, so here we go. So the first most obvious thing that I did here is I didn't box the bottom. However, I don't like the way that looks now that I've turned it out. So I am actually going to go back in and do a very small box of the bottom, which I'll show you in a second. I've used a pink zip. I used a contrast blue for the tabs on the end of the zip, just as a little additional extra feature. And you can see here where I haven't caught the lining, but I'm going back in anyway to sort out those box bottoms, so I'll sort that out then. Here's the other side. And this time I've gone really, really close to where that is, so it's practically enclosed, which looks really, really nice and neat and finished. Again, got quite a good match there. And instead of making a handle, I've just put a little bit of decorative ribbon on as well. So I'm just going to turn this back out and I'm going to do a much smaller box bottom. Okay, this time I'm going to, again, mark from the stitched edge, but I'm only going to do, I think, 1 inch, because I've got the bottom fabric of this bag is a lot shorter than the bottom fabric of the first bag I did. Okay, oh, look, that still hasn't quite caught. So I think what I'm going to do is sew that by hand, because I'll know that I'll get it then. That's really annoying. And I'm much happier with this box bottom. I think that looks lovely now. Really happy with that. Okay, so I've got a bit of a repair to do, a bit of pressing, and then we're all finished. Ta-da! 2 dodgy zipper bags, done and dusted. And if you've made one, you could, if it's before the 1st of June 2020, enter it into the dodgy bag mail that I'm running with Claudia of the Crochet Luna podcast. All the details are underneath this video in the description box. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.